The bikers laughed at Bud Spencer, calling him just an old movie brawler with fake screen punches. But the moment they pushed him too far, they realized this wasn't a movie, and they had just chosen the worst old man in the room. The diner had seen its share of rough men before. Truckers with bad tempers, drifters with too much whiskey in their blood, ranch hands looking for a warm meal and a colder fight. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air inside the place carried that old, ugly tension, the kind that made forks stop halfway to mouths and made decent folks stare harder at their coffee than they needed to. The iron serpents had taken over the two back booths like they always did. Leather jackets, mud on their boots, beer on their breath. Their laughter came in mean bursts, sharp and ugly, the kind that said they were not just having a good time, they were making sure nobody else could. They sprawled across the seats like the diner belonged to them, helmets tossed aside, cigarette smoke drifting over the tables, their voices carrying all the way to the counter. Betty, who had worked the place long enough to know trouble by the sound of its breathing, kept her eyes down as she refilled coffee cups. She moved with that careful speed women in places like this learned over time, quick enough not to invite attention, calm enough not to show fear. Millie, the younger waitress, hadn't learned that yet. "Come on, sweetheart," one of the bikers crooned, dragging his words like a dog pawing at a door. "Give us a smile. Ain't right serving a man looking like somebody shot his dog." A few of the others laughed. Millie shifted uncomfortably, clutching the coffee pot tighter. "I'm working," she said. Jade, their leader, leaned back in the booth and watched her the way a man watches something he assumes can't fight back. His grin was lazy, cruel, confident. "Maybe she needs encouragement," he said. That made the others laugh harder. Millie tried to step away, but Jade's hand shot out and caught her wrist. Not violently. Not yet. Just enough to remind her he could. The room went still in that quiet, shameful way rooms do when everybody sees something wrong happening and nobody wants to be the first one to stand up. "Let go," Millie said. Jade tilted his head. "That ain't much of a request." Betty took one step forward. "Jade." The front door opened. A gust of dry highway wind slipped into the diner, carrying dust and heat and the smell of gasoline. Heads turned, more from instinct than curiosity. The man who stepped inside was big, not just tall. Big in that old-fashioned way that made door frames look narrower and stools look less trustworthy. He wore a travel-worn coat over a checked shirt, with broad shoulders that filled the room before he even spoke. Time had thickened him, softened some edges, but not in any way that made him look weak. If anything, it made him look harder to move. He closed the door behind him, slow and calm, and let his eyes drift over the room. The gang, the girl's trapped wrist, the silence. Then he looked away from it all and walked toward the counter with the unhurried patience of a man who had spent enough years in this world to know exactly how foolish people could be. Betty stared at him for a second longer than she meant to. She knew that face. Most people did. Bud Spencer. Jade let go of Millie's wrist, though not because he had suddenly found manners. Something about the newcomer had broken the rhythm of his cruelty, and that irritated him. Bud took a stool near the far end of the counter and sat down heavily, the stool creaking beneath him. Betty cleared her throat. "What can I get you?" Bud opened the menu, looked at it once, closed it. "You got beans?" he asked. Betty blinked. "Beans? Beans, eggs, sausage, bread," he said in that deep, gravel-thick voice of his. "And coffee." "A lot of coffee." A trucker, near the window, almost smiled. Betty nodded. "We got all that." "Good," Bud said. "Been a long road." He took off his hat and set it on the counter. No hurry, no tension, no sign he cared at all about the gang in the back booth. That, more than anything, got under Jade's skin. Well. Jade drawled loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Look at this. A damn movie star. A few bikers chuckled. Bud didn't turn around. Betty started pouring his coffee. Jade pushed himself out of the booth, boots grinding against the tile. He adjusted his vest and started toward the counter with a beer bottle hanging from 2 fingers. "You deaf, old man?" he asked. Bud picked up the mug, took one slow sip, then set it down. "No," he said. The room stayed quiet. Jade stopped a few feet away. "You know who I am?" Bud glanced at him once, without interest. "Should I?" That got a few nervous laughs from the regulars. Jade heard them. His smile didn't disappear, but it changed, became thinner. "I asked if you know who I am." Bud shrugged. "No." Jade's jaw flexed. "I'm Jade." Bud reached for the sugar jar, spooned some into his coffee, stirred it once. "That's supposed to help me." A trucker coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. Jade stepped closer. "You think you're funny?" Bud looked at Betty. "How long on the beans?" Betty hesitated. "Couple minutes." "Good." Jade's face tightened. He wasn't used to being dismissed. Men like him lived on reaction. Fear, respect, anger, any response at all, so long as it proved they mattered. But Bud Spencer was treating him like a fly buzzing near a plate. "You got some nerve," Jade said. Bud gave the coffee another sip. "I've got patience too. Don't waste it." The diner seemed to exhale and freeze at the same time. One of the bikers muttered from the back, "This old bastard's got a mouth on him." Another said, "Probably left his tough guy act back in the movies." Jade grinned at that, eager to get the room back under his control. "That right?" he said. "That what this is? Another movie scene? You gonna smack me around for the cameras?" Bud's expression didn't change. Jade leaned closer. "I seen your kind before. Big on screen, loud music, fake punches, men fall down when the director says so." Bud looked at him then. Really looked at him. His eyes were heavy and calm, but there was something behind them that made Jade's grin falter for half a heartbeat. "Son," Bud said quietly, "I came in here to eat." Jade let out a short laugh. "Then eat." Bud's voice stayed low. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do." The air got tighter. Jade dragged the empty stool opposite Bud and sat down without asking, turning it backward and leaning his arms over the backrest like the whole thing amused him. "You know," he said, "I don't think old actors ought to travel alone. World's full of accidents." Bud looked at him for a moment, then at the stool, then back at his coffee. "I mind eating with idiots," he said. That one hit harder. Jade went still. At the back booth, the iron serpents barked with laughter, but it wasn't as confident as before. Even they could feel that the game had shifted. Their leader was being handled. And, worse, handled casually. Jade stood up so fast the stool legs scraped hard across the tile. "You think you're too good for us?" he snapped. Bud sighed through his nose. "No," he said. "I think you're worse than you should be." Betty set down the plate, then beans, eggs, sausage, thick slices of bread. The smell rolled up, warm and honest. Bud glanced at it and nodded in appreciation. Jade stared at the plate, then back at Bud, as if insult had become something physical. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Bud picked up his fork. "Move." Jade didn't. Bud's tone changed only slightly. "You heard me." Jade looked around the diner. Every eye in the place was on them. His men were watching. Millie was watching. Betty was watching. If he backed down now, he'd feel it in his bones for weeks. So he smiled. Then he reached out and shoved the plate. Beans and grease and eggs spilled across the counter, sliding into Bud's arm and dripping onto his coat. A hush fell so suddenly it was like the whole diner had been sealed in glass. Jade spread his hands in fake apology. "Oops." Nobody moved. Bud looked down at the ruined food, then at the coffee, then at Jade. He took a napkin, wiped his hand once, and folded the napkin very neatly. No rush, no flash of anger. That frightened Betty more than if he had jumped up yelling. "What?" Jade said, forcing a laugh now. "You gonna cry over dinner?" Bud lifted his eyes. "No," he said. He stood. And when Bud Spencer stood all the way up, the room changed. At the counter, sitting down, he had looked like a large old man. Standing, shoulders squared, he looked like something built for simpler, harsher times, something not especially interested in theatrics and completely unconcerned with noise. He was bigger than Jade, wider too, and somehow calmer. Betty took a step back. At the far booth, one of the bikers straightened. Jade covered the flicker of doubt on his face with another smirk. "There we go," he said. "Now the star wants to perform." Bud looked at the mess on the counter again. "You ruined my dinner," Jade snorted. "Buy another." Bud met his eyes. "You're going to." A few of the bikers shifted uneasily. Jade heard that and pushed forward harder. Pride had him by the throat now. "What if I don't?" Bud's voice stayed even. "Then I'll be annoyed." That got a laugh from the gang. Jade leaned in close, whiskey and cigarettes thick on his breath. "Annoyed," he repeated. "That's supposed to scare me?" Bud shook his head once. "No, it's supposed to warn you." Jade's face hardened. "Old man," he growled. "I'm done listening." He shoved Bud in the chest. A hard shove, the kind meant to get a man stumbling backward and prove a point to the room. Bud didn't move. Not an inch. Jade blinked. Before he could recover from that tiny shock, he shoved again harder. Bud still didn't move. One of the truckers near the door muttered, "Oh boy." Jade snarled and swung the first punch. It was a big, ugly haymaker, full of temper and bad decisions. Bud turned his head, just enough for the blow to miss. Then, with no wasted motion, he brought one enormous hand down across the side of Jade's head. The crack echoed through the diner, not like a gunshot, like a butcher slamming meat on a counter. Jade dropped sideways into a table, taking 2 plates and a sugar jar with him. Nobody in the room breathed. Bud flexed his fingers once and looked down at him. That was for the food. The bikers exploded out of the booth. Chairs scraped, glass tipped. Someone shouted. Someone else cursed. The first man at Bud came fast, full of noise and bravado. Bud caught him by the front of his vest, yanked him forward, and drove a short, brutal punch into his stomach. The biker folded in half with a sound like all the air had been punched out of his soul. The second one lunged from the side. Bud turned, slapped him across the face so hard the man spun halfway around and crashed into the counter stools. Betty ducked behind the register. Millie grabbed the coffee pot and backed toward the kitchen. Jade stumbled up, wild-eyed, one hand to his ear. "Get him!" he roared. 3 came at Bud together. That was their mistake. Against a smaller man, numbers mattered. Against Bud Spencer in a tight diner, all they did was get in each other's way. The first one reached for Bud's shoulders. Bud drove an elbow backward into the man's ribs without even looking, then grabbed the next biker by the belt and collar and launched him over a table. Plates shattered. Coffee sprayed. A regular near the wall yelped and pulled his hat down over his face. The third swung a bottle. Bud blocked the arm with one forearm, then hammered a fist down onto the man's knuckles. The bottle dropped. Bud grabbed him by the back of the neck and bounced him off the counter. "Second thing," Bud muttered, almost to himself. "Don't touch a man while he's hungry." For a second, the whole room became chaos. A biker flew into a booth. Another got dragged across the counter. One tried to jump on Bud's back and ended up flung sideways into the pie display. Bud did not move like a martial artist. He moved like weight given purpose. Everything was simple, direct, crushing. No wasted style, no flourish. Just a giant, irritated man removing obstacles between himself and what should have been a quiet meal. Jade wiped blood from his mouth and came in again, swinging harder now, anger replacing what little caution he had. Bud stepped in and drove a thick, short punch into Jade's chest. Jade stumbled backward, gasping. Bud pointed at him. "Stay down." Jade didn't. Men, like Jade, never did the smart thing, while other men were watching. He roared and rushed again. Bud caught him by the vest with both hands, lifted him just enough to make the moment humiliating, and threw him backward over the corner booth. The whole booth shook. One of the bikers near the window looked at the mess around him, the broken chairs, the bodies on the floor. Bud Spencer, standing in the middle of it, breathing hard but steady, and made a decision. "This ain't worth it," he muttered. Bud turned and looked at him. The biker froze. Bud pointed at the door. "Then leave." The man left. Fast. Another followed right behind him. That was all it took. The iron serpents had ridden in like wolves. Now half of them were limping, groaning, or looking for the exit, with the wide-eyed shame of men who had discovered too late that they were not the biggest thing in the room. Jade hauled himself up one more time, face red, lip bleeding, hair hanging loose over his forehead. "You think this is over?" he spat. Bud took one slow step toward him. Jade flinched before he could stop himself. The room saw it. That was the worst part for him. Bud stopped close enough that Jade had to tilt his head back slightly. "Yes," Bud said. "If you're lucky." Jade's nostrils flared. His chest heaved. But the fire had gone strange now. Not gone. Exactly. Just confused. Humiliation had started wrestling rage, and both were losing. Bud glanced down at the wrecked counter and the beans dripping onto the floor. Then he looked at Betty. "I'm sorry about the mess." Nobody laughed. It was too absurd and too sincere at the same time. Betty stepped out from behind the register, still staring. You okay?" Bud looked at the smear of sauce on his sleeve and the dented stool beside him. "No," he said. "I'm still hungry." That got it the first real laugh in the room, small at first, then spreading out in shaky relief. Jade heard it. He looked around and realized, in one brutal sweep, that the room no longer feared him. Not tonight. Bud's eyes settled back on him. "You owe the lady for the food." "And the furniture," Jade swallowed. For a second, it looked like he might say something reckless again. Instead, he reached into his vest with slow fingers, pulled out a wad of folded cash, and slapped it onto the counter. Bud nodded once. "Good." Jade backed toward the door. The few serpents still on their feet followed him, battered and silent. At the threshold, he stopped and glared. "This ain't finished." Bud picked up a surviving sausage from the edge of the counter, looked at it, then set it back down. "Then next time," he said, "bring manners." Jade left. The door slammed behind him. Silence settled over the diner like dust after a collapse. Nobody moved for a moment. Then the trucker, by the window, let out a low whistle. Millie finally unclenched her hands. Betty stared at the cash, then at Bud, then at the wreckage. "You really are Bud Spencer," she said, as if she still needed to hear it out loud. Bud lowered himself back onto the stool that hadn't been broken. "That's what they've been calling me." Betty laughed in disbelief. He looked at the ruined plate, then at her. "You got more beans?" She blinked once, then smiled despite herself. "For you?" "Yeah, I got more beans." "Good." Millie stepped out from the kitchen, still pale but no longer shaking as badly. "Thank you," she said. Bud looked at her with that same heavy, calm face. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank your boss for the coffee. That kept me patient." A few people laughed again. The room began to breathe normally. Chairs were set upright. Someone helped a groaning biker toward the door. Betty put on another pot of coffee. Outside, the last sound of motorcycles faded into the desert dark. When the fresh plate finally arrived, Bud studied it a second, as if confirming the world had corrected itself. Beans. Eggs, sausage, bread. He nodded with quiet approval. Betty leaned on the counter across from him. "You always travel into trouble?" Bud cut into the eggs. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "It just travels fast." That time, even Millie laughed. Bud ate in peace at last, while around him the diner slowly stitched itself back together. And if a few people kept sneaking glances at him, as if they'd just seen something halfway between a man and a myth, Bud Spencer didn't seem to mind. He was too busy eating,